continuing in our monthly theme of following Jesus. From our seats to the streets, becoming fully devoted followers of Christ. This month is on evangelism, and we're going to continue in that thought process about evangelism. And I want to begin by asking you a question. Have you ever lost something? If you have, raise your hand. Most of us can raise our hand to that. We've all lost something. Okay, you can put your hands down. Now, the second question I want to ask is, have you ever been lost? Guys, you can raise your hand too. It's okay. I know you don't like to admit it. All right, thank you. Today we're talking about lostness. The title of my sermon is called Lost and Found. When we use the word lost in a spiritual sense, we're talking about those who are outside of the church of Jesus Christ, the church that Jesus Christ established when he came to earth. The Bible tells us in Luke 19:10, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which is lost. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And while he was here on this earth, he taught his disciples how to do that. He taught his disciples how to share their faith with others. We mentioned last week that faith is one thing, that when we share it, we still have the same amount of it as we started. Our faith doesn't diminish when we give our faith away, when we share it with others. And so I want to focus on this idea of lostness today. The Great Commission tells us in Matthew 28:19 and 20, that we are to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things, this is Jesus talking, whatsoever I've commanded you, and behold, I'm with you always to the very end of the age. This is called the Great Commission. This commission was given to his disciples just prior to his ascension into heaven. And this was the very command that Jesus gave his disciples. And by extension, it's the very command that he gives to each person who is a Christian. It isn't the thing that makes you a Christian, but it is the role and the task of each and every Christian. We had a discussion in our Bible study this morning about how the early church had to gather a group of men together to take care of the everyday details of the church in order that the pastors and ministers could spend time in the Word, understanding that and sharing that and spreading that and focusing on that. And sometimes because of that, we think that it's the pastor's responsibility to share that with other people. That as a regular, quote-unquote, regular member of the church, that we don't have that responsibility. But I will tell you, this command that we just read is for every Christian, not just for the pastors. The pastors have a specific and unique role in that we're supposed to teach and train you in how to do just that, to share the love of Christ wherever you go. In the original language, brother, if you could put verse 19 back up there again. In the original language, that says... the Great Commission, the first verse. That verse says, go therefore and make disciples. If you study that in the original language, that word go actually means as you go. It doesn't mean you have to leave here and go somewhere way over there in order to make disciples. What it literally means is as you go about your daily life, as you do the things that you do every single day, make disciples. Well, that means that if we're going to do that, that people aren't just going to become disciples by just standing next to us in line at Walmart. You've got to say something There's some things that we have to do in order to do that. We have to genuinely be looking for those people who are lost. And they're all around us. You don't have to look far to find somebody who is lost. Again, remember the word lost is someone who is without Christ. We have lost family members. We have people that we love dearly who, if they die this very moment, would not be with you in heaven when you die. And yet we go about our lives as if there's no big deal about that. There's no problem. There's no rush. And one of the greatest enemies of what we call evangelism is this idea of, I'm going to get around to it someday. Someday, when the stars all line up and the conditions are just right, then I'm going to share my faith with that loved one. Someday. But someday never comes for some people. There are a couple of parables in the Bible that I want us to look at. It's found in Luke chapter 15. It's two parables. Parables are just stories that Jesus told. They're earthly stories with heavenly meanings. And there are two of these here. We're going to read the first one now and the other one in a second. But it's Luke chapter 15, beginning with verse 1. It says, Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. We're going to continue to the next parable in a minute, but I want to talk about this thought here. This parable is a parable that was designed to be something very familiar to the people in Jesus' day. How many sheep herders do we have here? Raise your hand. Okay, not too many. How many people in here know someone who's a sheep herder? Okay, one in the back. Okay, one over here. Okay, not such a familiar picture as we think about it today. And so when we read things like that in the Bible today in the 21st century, there's a little bit of an explanation that is required as we read those passages of Scriptures. And it's important for us to understand this because we don't have the frame of reference that people in Jesus' day would have. They would know immediately what would happen to a lamb or a sheep if it wanders away from the flock. They would know immediately. You would ask anybody, go to anybody on the streets of Jerusalem any time of the day or night and say, if a sheep wanders away from the flock, what's going to happen to it? And they would be able to tell you. Well, let me tell you what they would be able to tell you. And that is, a sheep that is lost is in deep peril. The word that's used, the Greek word that's used to describe lost is apolumi. And this is what it means. It means absolute destruction, death, and ruin. Leave that up there for a few minutes, brother, if you would. It means absolute destruction, death, and ruin. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like it's a possibility. It sounds more like it's a sure thing. If the sheep gets away from the rest of the flock and away from the shepherd, it's a sure thing that it's going to face absolute destruction, death, and ruin. That's why they say it is lost. Now, I think it's easy for us to make the leap from sheep to peeps. It's easy for us to make the leap because you see people who are away from the Good Shepherd. People who are away from, you like that, yeah? From sheep to the peep. When we get away from the one who is called the Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, then we are facing absolute destruction, death, and ruin. Brothers and sisters, that is what is in store for your friends who are unsaved. That is what is in store for your loved ones who are lost without Christ. They literally are facing absolute destruction, death, and ruin. And so, it's important for us to understand the significance of lost people. Sheep that are lost out in the wild are goners. And we have to understand some things about sheep. This is important. Sheep are not very bright. Can I just say that up front? They have no, I want you to think about this now. You know a little bit about sheep. You've seen pictures of them and things. They have no natural defenses. Sheep really have no way of defending themselves at all. No big horns, or, tusks, or anything like that they could fight with. They can't run very fast. If you've ever seen sheep move, they don't run at a gallop. Gentle lope, And on their own, they're not even very good at finding food and water. In essence, sheep are dumb. Now, again, sometimes we like to make the leap from sheep to peeps. But we need to understand something here, that unless someone goes out and looks for them, those friends of ours, those family members who are lost, are in the same predicament as these sheep that we just talked about. They don't know how to find what they need in order to be saved. It is not out there in the general public for them to discover on their own. It is a requirement then that God's people go out from where they are and come and bring them back into the fold. One of the things that we do real good in the church is we do real good at gathering together and doing great things together inside the building that we call the church, but the church is not the building. The church are the people that gather in the building. We do real good at that, and we don't have any trouble getting together for stuff, especially if there's food. If there's food, we'll even come even when we weren't planning to come, if we find out there's going to be food there. But when we say, but there are people out there that are lost and we need to go out there and find them, people will say, my schedule's really full. And that's just not my calling. And my children are sick, and we come up with 1,001 excuses for why we're not going to go out and look for it. And besides that, I'm doing a lot of work here. I'm taking care of the 99 that are here. I'm doing a good job at that, that accounts for something, doesn't it? But it says in that verse, he said, they leave the 99 out in the open field and go and search for the one who is lost. Brothers and sisters, this is a picture of evangelism. This is a picture that we've got to go out from our seats to the streets, and we've got to share the good news of Jesus Christ. So what does it take to find the lost? What does it take to find the lost? I want to tell you this, that the North American Mission Board Research Division did a study, and they have estimated that there are, write down this number, this is important, there are 226 million lost people in America. 226 million lost people in America. And that number is increasing by about 2 million every single year. So what do we do? What does it take to find the lost? Brothers and sisters, I believe the first thing that it takes is compassion. It takes compassion. We've got to have compassion for those who are lost. It's easy for us to have compassion for those that are around us, for those that are like-minded with us. It's easy to have compassion for them, and somehow we get angry with the world out there because they're acting like heathens. Well, guess what? The reason they act like that is because that's what they are. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And we get angry with them and we say, oh, I'm not going to have anything to do with them. They're ungodly. Yeah, they're ungodly. That's the whole point. You got to go reach them and bring them back. They're ungodly because they're lost. So we've got to have compassion. We've got to look at the world not from our own eyes, because we're human and we get offended easily. Come on. Can I get a witness? We get offended easily. Okay, so people say something crossways to us and we get our bottom lip all pooched out and we're not going to talk to them anymore. They hurt my feelings. They hurt my feelings. You see, and what that is self-centeredness. That's showing a lack of compassion. When people say things to you because of your faith, when people do things to you because of your faith, then you need to have pity on them. You don't need to express that. That just makes people mad when you say, I pity you. Well, I'm going to do something else to you. Say that. But you should have compassion. You should have pity for them. You should understand that they're acting the way they act because they don't have what you have. They've not experienced the love of Christ in their life. They've not experienced that peace that passes all understanding that comes to those of us who know Jesus Christ. We know who's going to win in the end. We've read the end of the book. We've read the back of the book. We know who's going to win. But they haven't, and they don't know that. And so instead of looking at them as the enemy, we need to look at them with compassion. We need to reach out with compassion. The picture that he uses here in this parable is a shepherd who has compassion for the one sheep that has left the flock and is out there in the world, who is in danger of death, destruction, and all of those things that come with being in the world and away from the one who can save it. And so the first thing that we need to have is we need to have compassion. Somebody once said, and I'm not sure where this was, it might have been Beth Moore or somebody said this. Some of our ladies may have heard this recently. There's only one thing worse than being lost. There's only one thing worse than being lost, and that's being lost and nobody's looking for you. Brothers and sisters, if we've abdicated our responsibility as Christians, then those people are lost and no one's looking for them. Jesus said in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, should not face utter, complete destruction, but have eternal life. We've got to have compassion. We've got to have compassion for those who are lost. The second thing that I see, though, is that we've got to have effort. We've got to put some effort into this. It takes effort. Look at the second parable here. Let's continue reading in verse 8 of Luke chapter 15. It says, or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost. Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So now Jesus changes the picture. We talked about sheep. Now he changes the picture to a woman who has lost some silver coins. If you know anything about the value of coins in that day, you know that 10 silver coins was a whole lot of money. It wasn't like what you've got in your pocket, some spare change. 10 silver coins was like close to a year's wage to the people back there. So what we're talking about is something that is very valuable that has been lost. When I was in the Army and stationed at Fort Leavenworth, I got a frantic call from my wife, who was a school teacher there on post one day. And that call prompted me to get in my car as quick as I could and make my way to where her schoolhouse was. And the call was this, that I just noticed that the diamond in my engagement ring is falling out, and I don't know where I dropped it. And so I got in my car. I dropped what I was doing, and I got in my car, and I drove to the school. And I got to her classroom, and I found a very distraught diamond. I can buy you another one. How would you respond, ladies, if that's the word that you got from your husband? That's exactly. Have y'all been reading my notes? That's exactly what she said. And so I said, after swallowing hard, I said, okay, then let's look for it. Now, I'm not a rich man, okay? We're not talking about a 6-carat diamond here. You know, something that you could see with the naked eye. We're talking about something, you know, that was a little less than 1 carat. Tiny little thing. She'll show it to you later. And you can see what I'm talking about here. We're not talking about some giant thing, but it was valuable. It not only had real value, diamonds are not cheap, as you know, if you've ever purchased one, but it had intrinsic value to her that was worth way more than any amount of diamonds that I could have provided for her. And so we began searching, and she called her friend, whom you met, Dixie Pascal. You all know who that is, some of you do anyway. She called Dixie, who happened to be stationed there with her husband, or her husband was stationed there, she was there with him, and Dixie came up with a great idea. Dixie said to Renee, don't tell the custodian not to sweep your room today, and have David go buy a brand new vacuum cleaner bag for your vacuum cleaner, and we'll put a brand new bag in, and then we'll shut the door and we'll sweep the entire floor of your classroom. And then we'll tear open the bag and see if the diamond is in there. It was a brilliant idea. Sorry I didn't think of it. And so we did exactly that. And guess what? We found the diamond. And there was great rejoicing in the Coram household that night. Now, why do I share that story with you? That's a modern day story that equates to the one that we read out of the Bible. Why do I share that story with you? You see, I could have said, honey, give it up. You're never going to find that diamond. Forget about it. It's too hard. The work is too hard. It's going to take too much effort. Forget about it. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the time that we're going to spend doing it. And we would have left there without that diamond. Unfortunately, one of the problems that we have in the world today is that Christians have that same kind of attitude with regard to those who are lost. We say, you know what, it takes too much effort. It's just too hard to do. It's just not worth it. You know? They'll figure it out somehow. We just need to get on with our lives. And so we give up too quickly. When it may be that somebody might just have a great idea on how to share the love of Christ with the one that needs to hear that good news. So we've got to have compassion for the lost, and we've got to exert the kind of effort that is necessary in order to find something. You know, somebody once said that you usually find something in the last place you look. You know why that is, right? You'd be pretty silly to keep looking for it once you found it. Okay? The problem is, for many Christians, they stop looking before they find it. They stop reaching out and sharing the love of Christ before that person who is a family member. Maybe you've talked to them over and over and over again, and because of that, you know, you're kind of blue in the face. And you just say, it's no use. Kind of felt like I felt that night in that class, that afternoon in that classroom. You know, it's just no use. It's not going to happen. But maybe the next thing you say would be the one thing that's going to make a difference. We've got to continue to extend the effort. The third thing is perseverance. And the question that I would ask with regard to perseverance is, how long do you keep looking? How long do you keep looking wait too long, though, it might be too late. Remember, we have no promise of tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen when we leave this room today and go out of this building and go on with our lives. We pass accidents on the interstate all the time. I was coming to church this morning on Interstate 24, and there was an accident between a semi-truck and an SUV that had happened. I don't know if anybody was killed in that accident, but there could have been. It could have been you. It could have been me. I don't know the answer to that. If we wait too long and we don't keep after that, it could be too late. Perseverance is important. In both of these parables, they kept looking until they found what they were searching for. I mentioned that I was in the Army. And when I was very young in the Army, I was single. I was stationed at Fort Benning. I lived in the barracks at Fort Benning, Georgia. And we were bored one night, and a group of guys that were living in the barracks kind of began to dare each other. You know how guys will sometimes do, and the dare gets bigger and bigger and bigger until pretty soon you talked yourself into doing something that, in hindsight, is pretty stupid. You know? And I was not airborne qualified. I was brand new private in the Army. And we convinced ourselves Fort Benning had a parachute club. The Fort Benning Parachute Club, Sports Parachute Club. And we all said, why don't we go out and join the Sports Parachute Club and parachute out of airplanes? Well, we found out that they don't parachute out of airplanes in the Sports Parachute Club at Fort Benning. They didn't back then. They jumped out of Huey helicopters, which is kind of a cool thing. And I thought, you know, in theory, this is kind of a neat thing. And so we sign up for this, and we go through some of the similar kind of training that you would go through, you might go through, if you're going to airborne school to become airborne qualified. We even use some of the equipment because some of the guys that were teaching us how to jump were the same guys that taught the other people how to jump, and so they had access to the equipment. So we got to use the same equipment the Army guys that were getting trained for that got to use, and it was kind of cool. And we learned how to do a PLF. How many of you know what a PLF is? Raise your hand. It's a parachute landing fall. It's a 5-point landing. Okay, I'm not going to demonstrate it because I'm 60 and I'm too old. But we learned how to do this. We learned what to do if we got out of the airplane or the helicopter and we found ourselves over trees. And then it was time to take our first jump. And our very first jump, the jump master put us out over the trees. If I'm lying, I'm dying. He put us out, and every single one of us, there were 5 of us in the class, and every single one of us ended up in the trees. Now, I'm not going to go into all the detail of that, but I will tell you that was a scary thing, okay? It was a scary thing. And what happened was I ended up in the top of about a 60-foot tree. A 60-foot tree. Now, the good news is that I'm safe. I'm all in one piece. You know, I look around and I can see everything and everything's moving. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But then I start to try to figure out how I'm going to get down from this tree. And I realize that what's happened is that I'm way up in the air. And because I had unhooked my parachute, I'm way up in the air without a parachute. And I tried to grab my parachute to pull it down, so I thought, you know, brilliant man that I am, I'm going to tie it off and I'm going to use it as a rappel rope to get down. But what happened was, when I landed on the top of the tree, the parachute fell over and caught the limbs, and it was stuck in the top of that tree. Short of cutting down that tree, there was no getting that parachute out of that tree. And so I had to climb down from that tree. I had to climb down 60 feet. The problem is about 45 feet, there were no more branches on the tree. I got to the bottom branch, and I'm 45 feet off the ground, and I'm thinking, can I jump 45 feet and survive this? And And then I thought better of that. And then I noticed there was a sapling growing up through the tree. And I said, I could do this. And I did this, and I leaped, and I put my arms around the sapling, and the sapling did this. And it set me on the ground. I let go of it, and it popped back up in the tree. And I was safe. And I was safe. And the guys that were out looking for us in the trees came up on the scene about the time that I got on the ground. Praise God, and I'm kissing the ground, and I'm glad to be alive in the ground, on the ground. And he says, we got to get the parachute out of that tree. And I said, there's no amount of effort that I'm going to expend to get that parachute out of the tree. This was in 1973. Okay? Now, I continued my military career, and in 1981, I graduated from flight training at Fort Rucker, Alabama. I became a helicopter pilot. And I got stationed back at Fort Benning as a helicopter pilot. And I'm out flying near where we were jumping that day. This was how many years later? This is 72, to help me out with the math here, to 1980. This was about 1982, I guess. So we're talking about something like 9 or 10 years after I landed in that tree. I am now flying helicopters over the tops of those trees. And guess what I found? That parachute that I had left in the top of that tree was still in the top of that tree. The problem was that it didn't look the way that it looked the day that I jumped. Because it had experienced 10 years of weather and wind. And what used to be a robust, tight parachute was now the shreds. Looked kind of like a ghost parachute. But it was still in the top of that tree. Now you say, well, that's a nice story, Pastor. That's a real nice story. Why did you tell us that? What has that got to do with what we've been talking about over here? The point is there was a way to get that parachute out of the tree. But I wasn't ready to expend the effort. I really had no compassion for the guys in the parachute club that had lost a very expensive parachute. I really had no compassion for them. That was their problem, not my problem. I didn't own the parachute. They didn't expect me to pay for the parachute. I didn't have enough money to pay for it, even if I wanted to pay for it. That was their problem. And so I didn't do anything about it. 10 years later, I flew over and I saw the results of my lack of concern for that parachute. Now, we're talking about a parachute, okay? Not a big deal. It's a thing. Things can be replaced. Things we can move on in life. Unfortunately, if we were to substitute the word parachute with the word lost, all of a sudden it takes on great significance. You see, sometimes it's too late when we finally get around to trying to see what we can do about sharing and finding the lost. It may be too late. Sheep don't last very long in the wild. I'm sure that if we'd have waited 10 years to look for that diamond, we'd never find it. We've got to be persistent. We've got to keep on keeping on. Perseverance is the key. How long do you keep looking? You look as long as it takes. They looked until they found what they were looking for. Brothers and sisters, you and I need to be looking for the lost. And we need to keep looking until they come to that saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Never give up. Never stop sharing your faith. You know when you can legitimately stop sharing your faith? Say it out loud. When you're dead. If you still have breath in your body, you need to be sharing your faith. Listen, I was stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I mentioned that earlier. And there was a guy there that led a Bible study. His name was George Kirkendall. And this guy had muscular dystrophy. He literally had to use 2 canes in order to get around. And this was a guy who was an infantry officer before he retired. And he was a stud. as if you know what the definition of that is, the military definition of that, he was a real he-man's he-man. Okay, this was a guy that was on the top of his game. Only he got adult muscular dystrophy after he retired, and it crippled him to the point that he walked like this, and he had to use 2 canes to get around. And people just knew that he was going to die from muscular dystrophy. But you know what? He kept on sharing the good news of Christ. This man was the one that developed a program to do neighborhood Bible studies, and every year, under his leadership, there were about 50 or 60 neighborhood Bible studies that were established every year at Fort Leavenworth, and he trained the people who did the Bible studies, and they in turn would teach the people. And the commandant of the Marine Corps, Krulak, was his last name, had come through there as a major and had gotten saved in one of those Bible studies. He later became the commandant of the U.S. Marines and established a code of ethics for the Marine Corps that the Army stole, called it leadership, LDRSHIP, or SHP, I think is how they used it. Point is that because George, who was crippled, who had every excuse in the book to say, I can't share the love of Christ with anybody, I can hardly get in and out of my car. But he did amazing things for God because the Holy Spirit prompted him to do it. And he said, I'm going to keep doing it. You know what? He ended up, I was there when this happened. He would eat breakfast, and then because of something that was going on in his body, it would come back up. And this happened 2 or 3 days, and he went to the doctor, and he discovered that he had advanced esophageal cancer. And they didn't give him 6 months to live. They gave him 3 weeks to live. It wasn't long before George was in the hospital, literally on his deathbed, waiting to die. But you know what? He didn't stop. He didn't stop sharing the love of Christ. 3 of the nurses that attended to him became Christians because George kept on looking for the lost. Even from his hospital bed, he kept looking for the lost. And when he died, the number of people that had come to know Jesus Christ, and the number of people who, having come to know Jesus Christ, who shared the love of Christ with others, who came to know Jesus Christ, and it continues on and on exponentially, the numbers cannot be counted. This man, who was frail because of illness, continued to look for the lost. Brothers and sisters, if we have an ounce of breath left in our body, we need to keep on keeping on. When do we stop looking? We never stop looking until we find all the ones who are lost. Keep looking as long as it takes. We have a responsibility through the Great Commission to look for the lost. It takes compassion. Yes, it takes a lot of effort. And it takes perseverance. But what if you're the one who was lost and nobody was looking for you? Let's not let that happen to anybody that we know. Keep looking for the lost. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you.
With one voice, we will sing. Every tribe and every tongue brings us harmony. With one voice, we will bring heaven's beautiful melodies down to this earth.